to ask any questions that you might have. Over to you, Vicky.
Well, thank you very much, Barry. That's a great collection of photos and some very informative recollection of those times, which, you know, actually, especially the Elan project, looked like a great camaraderie during that project. Is that right?
It certainly was, and I said earlier that the Spooner brothers remain very close friends of mine. To this day, Colin I regard as one of my very best friends. Ian Doble I'm still in touch with. He's a great guy, and we've had many reminiscences over the years. All of them contributed to a book that I wrote that you can see there, 45 plus years without John DeLorean. I realized from my first book, which is called John Z, the DeLorean and Me, that the DeLorean name sells books, because that first one was a sellout. But there's still copies left of the other, which includes in more detail the story of the Elan, if you're interested. So I need the money. I'm well retired, so it's still available if you Google it on woodbinepublications.com, or look at eBay. You might find some copies. Yeah, great camaraderie. Can't get it out of my mouth. Great people. A team that really worked very closely and very well, including young Roberts, of course, who I remember very well as a very keen engineer, young engineer. Thank you, Clive, for your input.
Thank you, Barry. There's, I'm sure, lots of questions that will come through, and one's on the chat, but I might ask, it's about the Series 2. So I might just ask that person to unmute themselves and actually ask the question. I'm not sure who it is. Reddy Baker?
Yeah, hi, that's me. Yeah, just wondering if, Barry, if you were involved in the S2 of the M100 at all.
No, not at all. That was a program that really only, very, very sad that the Elan program came to a very abrupt halt, M100, as a production car. I think it was very sad. I'd also kicked off at Mike Kimball's request, a cost reduction program with a team of my guys working on it that was handed over to Lotus when it was part finished. We'd found out many ways to get money out of the car. Ian Doble took over that responsibility after I ended my time with the program with Lotus. I don't quite know what came of it, but there were vast opportunities to take money out. GM decided it was too expensive to make. They weren't making enough money out of it and ended it. But they were left with, to my amazement, about 500 Isuzu engines in stock that were lying there for some time. And that was the main reason why the Series 2 was developed and produced. Well after my time.
No, that's great. Thanks. It's been really informative. I think it's been brilliant and great to see the car coming into development.
Thank you.
That's very good. Now, Bruce says, sorry, Barry. Bruce has a question for you. Bruce,
I'm being mistaken for Bruce Willis all the time. You'd be amazed. That is an in-joke. When I worked in Northern Ireland, just as a side, when I worked in Northern Ireland, my secretary had a broad Ulster accent, and she pronounced my surname Willis, you see. And B. Willis was, sadly, I was expected at airport check-ins and hotels as B. Willis. And the other man was at the peak of his fame at the time. there were many disappointed young women when I turned up. So, but Willis is a problem I've had for years. Carry on. As is Bruce.
Well, I'm not sure whether our Bruce has ever been confused with being Bruce Willis. Have you, Bruce?
Oh, there is a Bruce.
No. Barry, I'm one of the fortunate/unfortunate owners of one of the 129 NAs produced. That aside, what sort of consideration was given by Lotus in terms of repairs? Because every time something goes wrong with the car, it means pulling things so much apart to get to, like the oil cooler, or even simply changing the oil filter. You've got to be almost a gymnast to do it.
Oh dear. I'm very disappointed to hear that.
Well,
I'm afraid that sort of detail didn't come into the equation. You can imagine I got less than 12 months to get that car into production. By that time, the engine, installation of the engine had been pretty well settled. So my role didn't involve overseeing anything related to engine to speak of, other than making sure the development was completed at the time. So all I can do, Bruce, is apologize.
Keeps me amused on a cold night, trying to get to things. And, oil cooler means, both front wheels off, liners off, got 8 bolts out. Then you surround, there's a shroud, a fiberglass shroud that goes around the oil cooler. And then to get to the bolt that holds it on, it's almost impossible. But
oh dear.
I love the car, but I just question if somebody really designed it, or they just thought, oh, we've got this motor, we'll just stick it in there. It doesn't matter that the oil cooler's only got about, less than an inch clearance to the firewall.
I'm still in touch with Peter Stevens, Colin Spooner, and Ian Doble. I'll pass on your best wishes to them next time I see you.
Thank you.
I would really like to know, Bruce, why it is that you think that your Lotus M100 should be an exception to any other Lotus, really, in terms of...
Well, mine is an early one, so I've got the Opera headlights, and they're still intact. So it's
well, don't forget lots of trouble usually serious, Bruce.
Well, unfortunately, my plane, I believe, must have been freighted from UK to South Africa. As a result, the bonding of the panels pushed up through the paint, so the paint has these wrinkles where the bonding lines are.
God.
But
you still got this car. You still got this car. You still have it.
Of course. I've only had it for 7 years, but I don't think I'll ever sell it.
What a hero you are.
Sorry?
What a hero you are. Hero.
Can't get that one.
You're a hero.
I said you're a hero.
Oh, sorry. No, not me.
Well, I hope you do keep it. There's not many M100s we get to see much these days. So yeah.
You know me, Vicky. I'm a sucker for punishment. I've got a Europa S and an M100. So.
Wow. You are it. So.
Exactly.
Punishment, don't you? Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure there's some other people tuned in that have that either own or have owned and enjoyed their ownership of an M100. Is there anyone else out there that has got a question or a comment?
I want one from Clive Roberts.
Just feel free to unmute yourself and maybe just when you finish.
I think Clive should answer the questions on packaging, although both me and him could probably answer a bunch on that. But from my perspective, it was interesting seeing a lot of those photographs because, as with Clive, we recognise those individual cars, like the ones going out doing the hot weather testing out in the desert and so on. some of the characters. I've been in the car industry designing cars for pushing 30 years now, and I started my career on the Elan, and I would say that that is still the program that had the best team and the most fun on it, whilst also the most pain, which is why I've had mine for 15 years and could never sell it. It's got blood in it, that vehicle. I think for most of the people that worked on it, there were a lot of people putting in very long hours to meet the deadlines on that car.
Right.
And
Clive,
just having the
sorry, David. Yeah.
Go on.
I was going to ask Clive whether he was one of the guys that I stopped tearing off to Turin and back in an Elan. So he stayed at home to do the work that he wanted doing.
No, you didn't stop me because I was on the first run.
Oh, you were?
For the,
Okay.
I did the first run. For the benefit of those who don't know this story, I should preface this by saying that I worked for Ian Doble. I was development manager, and Ian Doble was a lovely fellow and a natural leader. He was an absolutely superb leader, and he came to us one day and said, "Oh, I got some good news. There's a new guy coming to help run the program, a chap called Barrie Wills. He's an old colleague and acquaintance of Mike Kimberley." So we all thought, oh, great, it's going to be somebody to help us. So we showed up for the first meeting thinking there's going to be this helpful chap who's going to listen to what we need. And in walked Barrie, kicked the door in. "Okay, you lot, where's your progress reports? I want status reports on my desk tomorrow morning. Get out of here and get on with it." So we all retreated into the corridor, shivering and shaking. And I've been shivering and shaking at the mention of Barry's name ever since. But the story to which Barrie referred is that back in the early days of, I think, the Europa, I believe it was Tony Rudd did a prove-out run from Hethel to Turin and back. Was it Turin?
Somewhere in Italy, wasn't it?
It was Rome. Over a weekend in Europa. And it was some kind of famous piece of company folklore. So somebody got the idea, let's do it with the Elan every weekend. And you'll leave on a Friday night and the car will be back at work on Monday morning. And I was given the honor, I guess, of doing the first one. And it was a great experience. And the only requirement was you couldn't leave work before 5 o'clock Friday. You had to be back at work in time for starting on Monday. And you needed a picture of yourself and the car outside the Colosseum. And I think it was useful for the first 2 or 3 runs. Barrie probably thought otherwise. It became, needless to say, being Lotus, it became a competition on who could get there and back fastest. There are stories about, well, my run ended up going across the Alps because the tunnel was blocked by snow. So we ended up going through a skiing village on summer tires. And it was a fairly interesting event. But by the time Roger Becker got to do it, he, of course, being the head of development, had to be the first back. So it became a bit of a race where the technique developed into go to Rome, but don't stay there, drive halfway back before you sleep, and then you can be back in England on Sunday lunchtime. So I think the value did diminish, but it was, as much as the technical benefit, it established a lot of camaraderie, because you get back, compare notes, get the car fixed, it was the home of a lot of spontaneous improvements. Didn't get drawn, didn't get approval, didn't get budgeted, but the next people who went to Rome would have a better spec than the last one. So that's how it worked.
Yeah, I called it the boys' own caper.
It was a bit that way.
Yeah.
But You didn't manage to stop the Snetterton 24-hour test either, did you?
Didn't even know about that one.
My point exactly.
I do remember the time I called a meeting on Sunday of the Product Coordination Committee just to prove a point that if I could make it from all the way from Coventry at 8 o'clock in the morning, so could they from living in and around Ethel.
Yeah.
Look, I've owned my land for 22 years, and over those years, I've heard a lot about. There's a fallacy that the short wheelbase is due to conversion issues between inches and centimeters, which I believe is complete rubbish. But that is right. Like it was intended to be short wheelbase, right?
Yeah, short and wide. Referring back to Bruce's question about service aspects, believe it or not, we actually tried at the start, remembering that Lotus was part of GM in those days. They shipped us almost a truckload of their project target books. And we did start off trying to meet all of the GM requirements before we realized it was ludicrous. The reason your front suspension is cast iron is because we thought we made an honest attempt to meet GM pothole requirements. The car is bigger and heavier than it needs to be because GM helped us to death, basically. And we did make an honest attempt to meet all the service requirements. Before time ran out, the chap called Barrie Wills came in and just said, get this car built. And throughout the program, style triumphed over everything. Peter Stevens carried a lot of sway with Colin Spooner, who was driving along as a got buried underneath that very, very stylish bumper, then that's the way it was going to be. It was both styling and the pressure of time that just pushed a lot of the rational service and owner use constraints to one side.
I have to say, looking at Barry's pictures of the early designs, I think the design that finished with was spot on. Like it's such a good looking car. Even today, 30 something years on, it looks top notch.
Yeah, I agree completely.
There's a comment I could make there when you showed a picture of Chuck Jordan. The background to that is that, as Barry said, there was a design competition, but there was an absolute total commitment and determination within Lotus, led by Mike Kimberley, Colin Spooner, that we will win this competition come what may. And you might notice that the other two were bucks, essentially. They were exterior models with no interior, whereas we threw everything at ours. It was a fully detailed car that looked as if it could run. And that was just one of the means that was employed to win that competition. And I was in Detroit during the later stages of the program. I can't remember why, but I was with Peter Stevens, and we went to the design center in Detroit and happened to run into Chuck Jordan, who came across in a barely friendly manner. I didn't know him, I didn't move in those circles, but of course Peter Stevens did. And he came across and gave a very faux friendly but terse greeting to Peter Stevens, ignored the rest of us, and the greeting was along the lines of, "Suppose you think you're pretty smart then, do you, Stevens, pulling that trick on us?" That was the tone of it.
Bad loser, eh?
I would say.
I'm sure Giugiaro wouldn't have been like that. He certainly wasn't. Colin and I had a lovely reunion with the Giugiaro about 4 or 5 years ago. He invited us over to Turin for lunch with him, and his translator, his cousin Silvano Corvash, and he was as charming as ever, of course, in the true Italian way.
Can I ask, what was the market, the target market for the Elan?
When my task was to ensure that the car was engineered for UK, USA, and Japan, basically. Those are the three markets that the initial engineering was completed for anyway. We didn't finish, before I left, we didn't finish the US design, because despite the fact that GM had assured Lotus that airbags wouldn't be introduced within the time frame that the Elan was in development, they damn well were, and an airbag program had to be undertaken, led amazingly by Oliver Winterbottom, who of course was, as you all know, was originally hired by Lotus as a stylist, and did the Elite and the Eclat for Chapman. But that's Oliver finished up as chief engineer of airbags, and that once that was done, it went into the US market.
I had one very memorable trip to the US, scoping out airbags and suppliers with Oliver, and I didn't know why I was going, because I was mainly in charge of vehicle driving attributes, and I had a bit of a diversion into the interior by Ray Dell. But I realized once we were in the States that my function to pay off his bar bills, because he could then sign, and we didn't need to go any higher. And that was my role in life, was signing off Oliver's bar bills.
Well,
and there you go, you see. That's so for people in the meeting, Clive was my first boss as a development engineer when we worked for Roger Becker, and my main role with Oliver Winterbottom was on crash programs, signing off his bar bills, and that was my main mode of getting respect from Oliver, was that I could stay up as long at night as he could drinking whiskey. And
well, it might be interesting, David and Clive, to know that Oliver was a contemporary of mine as an apprentice at Jaguar. When I knew him, he was a 7-stone weakling. You've never seen anybody slimmer, and he was learning to drink at that time. I never paid his bar bills, but by God, he was learning to consume them, and I think that's one of the things that packed on a bit of weight with him.
It certainly was, and as Clive said, his bar bills had to be signed off by the execs. So as long as we paid, he could sign them. And some of those nights went on a long time with testing the next day. So, but the other interesting thing as well was what people often overlook is that car had the world's biggest slush molded dashboard or instrument panel. And it was a breakthrough for Lotus. No one else in the world had done it, and we were running reject rates on that, if you remember, Clive, of about 90% of everything that was molded was thrown out or ripped apart. The fiberglass carcass was reused and reskinned and re-injected, and then holes and voids were hand filled. And Clive used to have me go into Radell 3 days every week. I was at college full time, and I used to go to Radell during the day, do my college at night, and the college let me have the flexi time. As long as I didn't fail any exams, I could spend my time going down to Radell trying to productionize that all that interior. It was hellish, to put it bluntly. The right hand drive being the first off the ramp was the worst. Left hand drives always fit together a lot better, but right hand drives they always had a molding deficiency in the carcass, which is why when you saw the picture of that instrument panel, there's always the gap down the left-hand side. That was a molding deficiency that was claimed to be impossible because both parts were cut from the same data, but it was caused grief for everyone. But it was a nightmare, Radel. They went out of business, thankfully. So
I can only apologise for that, because
yeah, I don't know who sourced them, Barry.
I didn't source them. That was Nick Sutton, who I hand trained at Reliant and DeLorean, but that's another story. But another thing that Kimberly did when you were in real trouble with Radel, they were running late, and the scrap was so high. He asked me if I'd go in there and kick them into production, and I did. I did another day a week at Radel. Got their managing director Jack Shaw fired, not deliberately, but he was fired. I think the French owners found out that, well, what the hell, or said, what the hell is this Englishman coming in from Lotus to tell us how to run our business? And anyway, Shaw was fired and replaced by a Frenchman whose name I can't remember, but we did at least get them into production on time to meet the launch dates, but it would appear that despite that, the quality was not all it should have been. I can only say I'm sorry for that.
Going back to a previous, who the target market was, I'm not sure whether you meant who is the owner, what kind of attributes you wanted we were trying to put in the car, because that, I think, was one of the weak points, that it wasn't very well defined, that we were trying to make a car, because as Barry pointed out, it wasn't very well defined at the start. And I think numerous of us all had slightly differing ideas of who we were trying to make a car for, as witness to which we were in the workshop one day and a massive crate arrived on a forklift. And we gathered round as it was beaten apart, and inside was an Isuzu automatic apparently, because he thought an automatic version would be good. And fortunately, we were just standing there stunned, because it was so enormous and so heavy. It just clearly was never even going to come near the car, to everyone's relief. But I think that was indicative that we had too wide a spread or span of who we were trying to target and please. And that's where Mazda did a very good job with the MX-5. They didn't try to make it extremely capable in every direction. They set their goals, their dynamic targets, pretty modest, and they absolutely hit them. And they selected them very well, because that's what people wanted.
Yeah, as you said in my book, Clive, a little bit you wrote for me.
Oh.
Thank you again for that. You've looked at the pictures, have you? In the book? I'm not expecting you to have read it.
I did, cover to cover, and it's right here.
Really? My word. Yeah. Good Lord, I am impressed.
The Elan was kind of famous for, they kind of wrote it down as bankrupting as Lotus in GM's ownership, right? Like they spent so much money building it. Is that true, or is that another sort of fallacy?
I don't believe it. I think that for whatever reason, GM obviously were aggrieved by the fact that they'd had these several numbers of delays. You know, quite seriously, when I was brought in, it basically was to save the program, and that's why it had to be done, regardless of absolute 100% satisfaction with the car. It had to be done by the London Motor Show, October, November of '89 or whatever it was. And I think the Elan had got a bad name within GM, and I think particularly after Kimberly had gone, it was only a matter of time before it was canned.
So Barry, you you mentioned about the cost reduction activity that you did.
Yeah.
One of the last things that I did there was I took over that cost reduction working for Ian, and it was also amalgamated with warranty reduction. And I was working for Oliver on those. And Oliver's view of the world was the insurance company could look after warranty reduction. We didn't need to fix that. And for the S2 owner, the S2 had the revised exhaust, the revised hood and seals, and the metal fixing gear linkages. And they were all the things, they were our 3 big warranty issues. And if I recall the numbers, we were claiming around £3,000 a unit on
Wow.
fixing those 3 items for customers. That was one of the things that ticked a lot of people off. But the S2 had all those parts in, and it made a massive difference to the vehicle. Certainly for the robustness of it, the exhaust and the gear linkages, as Clive will remember, were somewhat fragile. The original gear linkages were plastic end abutments that used to break off. But we were running all that, and it was at that point that the program was canned. And we knew we were still making money. As long as we made 5 vehicles a day or could sell 5 vehicles a day, we were profitable. And that was Ian Doble's position as well. And there were a bunch of people kicked out effectively on one day, which was something to do with the bad blood around some of the people trying to keep the car and some of the people trying to get rid of the car.
Yeah.
So it was a sad demise, really.
Yeah.
But it was good that the S2 came back and put in some of the good stuff that we were trying to develop at the end of the S1.
Thanks, David. I've actually got an S2. Never had a problem with gear linkages. Did have to replace the exhaust,
There you go.
but otherwise,
Sorry, can I just interrupt?
otherwise,
Vicky,
it's a great car.
excuse me. I'm going to have to spend 2 minutes to go to the bathroom. Please excuse me. I'll be back.
Okay, that's fine, Barry. I reckon there's a couple of people trying to break in with some questions, and well, I'm sure we'll want Barry to be here to listen. But does anyone want to share any comments about their experiences with the M100 or DeLorean while we wait?
I'll give my comments. So I've got an S2 I bought back in '94. I drove it for 16 years every day as my work car, and it did well, leaked like a sieve when it rained, but it's got towels in the car to get over that. But it was, being an S2, it was really good. So it never had a problems other than the water just leaking in.
Well, we do blame Tickford for that, as was noted. That's definitely somebody else's problem.
Is it worse than an Elise early model?
I'll have to ask the guy that sits next to me at work, because he did the drafting work for the Elise roll top.
Yeah, the Elan
David's
does
better than
leak more.
MGB.
The Elan does leak more than the Elise, for sure.
Not out of the plant, though. Every one of them was perfect. Honest.
So what happened?
The car moved. The roof didn't.
Right.
A lot of it was down to the water management, the approach.
Sorry, what was that?
The Elan is not a wet day car. You don't drive it on a wet day. Why would you?
There's that aspect, yeah. But there was a lot of work to develop those seals. They were based on the Corvette design, the closed cell foam seals. But a lot of it came down to, I think, the water management philosophy as well. Actually, if you look at an MX-5, it lets water in, but it channels it away. So it's a controlled leak. If you look at their seals, their U-channel seals that are designed to allow water into the middle of the seal and guide it away, whereas the philosophy on the seal system for the Elan was to keep water out, and that's a much harder job.
Also, the philosophy with the M100 was to channel it onto the driver.
Oh, that's harsh. Because if you look at a Porsche 944 owner's handbook, I think it says don't park it in the rain, it leaks.
Just looking at
they would just know a bit more up front.
Looking at the picture, we're all looking at the red car from the rear. You can see one of the handicaps the Elan has. One of the problems it set itself is the extreme angle of the side windows leaning in. That exposes so much glass area and seal to the rain dropping vertically. If you just look at the plan view, most cars, the glass is virtually invisible from above, but the Elan has both the top and the bottom exposed to the rain. So it starts off with a tough challenge.
There's the MX-5, illustrating exactly your point, Clive. It's entirely different, isn't it? Can you still see that picture?
Yeah. That's a way of saying we don't want water leaks, thank you.
Yeah. And then you also look at the MX-5 with a quarter light and a glass guide to the top of the glass. That makes a big difference with body sealing, because your glass positioning is a lot more variable in a pillarless or in a non-guide setup. Yeah. So very small variations set you up to leave water pathways in. It looks a lot more stylish without the quarter light.
Yeah.
But if I recall, Clive, we did actually consider a quarter light, didn't we? But it got junked.
Yeah, it didn't get beyond the first conversation because it was all. It wouldn't jeopardize the style of the car.
Yeah, definitely more stylish with that. So I agree. We're coming close to the end, and I thought I'd open it up again now that you're back, Barry, to see if there's any more questions or comments. That's okay.
The old man's problem. Yeah. The record to go 45 minutes for it to be.
Oh, you've done very well.
Thank you.
So, yeah, is there anyone with any more questions or comments?
Hi, hi, it's Guy here. I've got a question on the DeLorean side of things. There's been a bit more recent Hollywood interest in the DeLorean story, and I think there's a movie that was released last year called Driven about DeLorean. I don't think it mentions Lotus too much. I'd just be interested to know if there is any movies or documentaries that you've seen that tell the true story rather than a fictionalized one.
Driven is dreadful, absolutely appalling. In every respect, the only thing that you could say about Driven is at least the guy who took part of John DeLorean had grey hair, silver hair. That's the only thing that you can say that was correct about it. Yeah, there's too many out there, I think. You clearly haven't seen the one that I started.
No, I don't think I have. Might be able to find it on YouTube or something.
There's one made. It's available on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Framing John DeLorean, and it's just the true story of how John was set up by the FBI with that cocaine sting. And I'm a talking head in that. I was a talking head and voiceover in it sufficiently enough for me to be invited to go to New York for the premiere of it in the Tribeca Film Festival, where I walked down the red carpet with my young daughter of 23 on my arm, with a very attractive young blonde, just to get the people talking about me. But in case they thought she wasn't my daughter. But that's good. That's very accurate. It doesn't tell the full story of the DeLorean program. There is another one I think that Netflix did as a series. Again, I think that's more of a more extensive story of the program. Colin Spooner's a talking head in those, and in fact, Colin was a talking head in Framing John DeLorean. So there's an element of Lotus activity in that. So yeah, I recommend Framing John DeLorean. It's good. Look for it on Amazon. And if you try Netflix, I can't remember what that was called, but it was also shown on BBC Northern Ireland as a two-parter, the Netflix one. So it's obviously an independent production. So search around the internet, you might find both those.
Thanks.
I'm still waiting for Bruce Willis to play me.
I don't think you want him to play you now. I think
he's too old, far too old.
He's far too old, and yeah.
Yeah, he'd need to wear a great big black toupee anyway. So.
That's right. Just on the DeLorean, well, I don't know much about it really, but I gather the new DeLorean that they've produced, doesn't seem to me to have any resemblance or any real association.
Got building doors. I'm very disappointed in them because I was allowed, I'm very honoured, I guess, to be one of about 4 or 5 people that were allowed on a Zoom thing like this to view the launch of their renderings of the so-called new DeLorean. I was impressed by the car. It's quite an attractive looking thing, but when I did my research afterwards, I realised that I thought it was something familiar about it, and it turns out it's part of an Ital Design back collection. It's a concept they did in 2019 called Da Vinci, and it looks like they basically upgraded that in a similar way to the work that Giugiaro did in smoothing the lines from the original Proto 1 DeLorean to the car that went into production. They've done something similar with Da Vinci. Now, I think they're allegedly showing a prototype at Pebble Beach this coming August, the Concours at Pebble Beach in August, and we'll have to see what that turns out to be. I suspect that it's going to be built by Ital Design apparently, and so I suspect it's Da Vinci taken from the full-size model that there are pictures of on the internet, turned into a running car. It's carbon fiber body. It's rumored to be going to be selling in the region of $150,000 US. In my view, as much as I love the DeLorean brand, in a similar way, I'm fond of the M100 in a similar way. But the DeLorean brand doesn't match up to a mid six-figure selling price. Competing with Ferraris and Lamborghinis. It's not going to stand up there at all. So I'm very skeptical about the whole thing, sadly. But there we go.
Yes, I understand your sentiment there. Simon Henbis potentially, or Simon H at least. Netflix, Myth and Mogul, John DeLorean. Is that the one you're talking about?
That's the one.
That's the one, yeah. I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Simon. So I think we've done very well tonight. We've got through certainly some great stories and some wonderful pictures and insights into an extraordinary era of Lotus and certainly some great insights into what you've done, Barrie, and Clive, thank you for your contributions, and David also, you've certainly were part of the Elan story. And I would like to thank you very much for joining us, and in particular, Barrie, for your presentation.
I just want to ask Barrie a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Have you driven the Elan and the DeLorean? And if you have, which one is your favourite?
Oh, what a dreadful question. Yes, I've driven both. In fact, during the latter stages of the Elan program, I had a trusted former, well, a colleague of mine. He was assisting me in my business, and I took an Elan out through the for a day through the Derbyshire Dales, which was an interesting experience, and we did a sort of checklist of snags that we picked up. Not many. Certainly enjoyed that very much indeed. DeLorean, I had one of the few, one of only 12 right-hand drive DeLoreans, a conversion as a company car, and in DeLorean, I finished up as the third and final CEO during the receivership, or administration as it's called these days. And at the end of it, the receivers were quite pleased with the job I did, and they offered to allow me to buy that car for £5,000. At that stage, having fired 2,500 people and set the whole plant up for plant and equipment up for auction, you know, only about 18 months to 2 years after we equipped the plant with the same equipment, I really had enough. So I said, no, thank you very much. That's one of my biggest regrets, because a right-hand drive DeLorean is now retailing, if you can find one, and there'll be one or two more conversions since, for about £50,000, tenfold what I could have bought it for. Mind you, inflation has occurred, but not to that extent. So yeah, I've driven both. I think I'd have to say, I think of the two, the better car to drive was the Lotus. The DeLorean has a few shortcomings. It's not as bad as was, I don't know whether you get Top Gear in Australia, do you? You get the current.
We do. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah, some of it.
They did the DeLorean. I was a talking head on that as well. You haven't seen it. They drove it. One of the three comedians drove a DeLorean on that, and I ran the Hethel test track incidentally. That was interesting. Mike Kimberley's a talking head on that as well, as is Colin Spooner. And he didn't like it at all. He gave it a really bad review. But it's not as bad as if you get a good one. It's not a good. It's a good car. It's a good car. Lotus did a great job. Only Lotus could have undertaken the project within 28 months and produced the car that went into production sale. Porsche quoted John DeLorean 6 years to develop the car, you know, but Lotus. I don't think Lotus knew how long it was going to take. They just wanted the money. Chapman did. And of course, Fred Bushell went to jail. So much did he like the money. He was the only one found guilty of the three: John DeLorean, Colin Chapman, and Fred Bushell, who took the original American investment money, not the British government money. That's another myth.
Yeah. We could get you back for another night just to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, pity that the books sell out, but never mind. Yeah. Yes, there's lots of tales of that, don't we?
Yeah. I've got one last question if we have time.
Of course.
The choice of engine in the DeLorean, most people I know who've even got them say the car is underpowered. Why did a Volvo engine go in it? I suppose.
Well, it was the engine that John selected, and it was one of the few engines that suited the rear engine format that John wanted. He's very keen on a rear engine. The engine takes a lot of bad press, mainly because it was underpowered by the strict Californian regulations that existed at that time. Yeah, while we in the rest of the world were killing the world by chucking out emissions from our cars, the Californians had got strict rules that we had to meet. And John had decided that to make it easy for the dealers to be flexible in America, that whereas there were two standards, there was a US federal standard and there's a Californian standard, which is more severe. We build all our cars to the Californian standard. Now, the underpowered bit comes largely from the British press, who were against us from day one, who started to get hold of cars and were comparing them with European cars that had no emission controls. And that's why the car and the engine has a reputation of being underpowered. It was underpowered by rest of world standards, but I don't think you'd find many Californians complaining about it being underpowered, because all their cars were underpowered.
Okay, thanks.
But there were better engines to choose. We very nearly, I had to go back and renegotiate the contract. The only contract I inherited was with Renault for the PRV engine, and I felt it was overpriced. I didn't tell John, but Gene Cafiro, who was our number 2 to John, gave me authority to go back to Renault and renegotiate the deal. And in preparing myself for renegotiation, I found an engine from Mitsubishi, which met all the regulations, that was more competitive, and I used that in the renegotiation. But it would have been nice really to switch to the Mitsubishi engine, but we were too far down the road in development, as it turned out.
Thanks.
Okay. Nothing else?
Can I just say one more thing, Vicky? I'd just like to thank Barry for answering a completely unsolicited email from me, not knowing who I was or what it was about, just simply asking if he would give this talk to our virtual club night out of the blue. And the only thing that I could put in the email to kind of work as a hook was that we both fell out with the same person back then, and that seemed to work. So I would like to point out that he really did just agree to give this talk to someone that he only met in passing as a junior engineer, and had absolutely no idea who the email came from. So I'd really like to thank him for that.
Well, David, thank you very much indeed for your kind words. And yeah, we were talking about that. We were upset by the same guy. But I'm just pleased he finished up working for a ball bearing company in India. Served him right. Yeah, but no, thank you all for being such an attentive audience, and for your very good questions. And let's hope we can maybe meet up again sometime. Who knows?
Yes. So on behalf of the club, Barry, thank you very much for your time and your passion. It's obviously a very deep-seated and illustrious career that you've had, and we're very grateful for you giving us some insights. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone for attending tonight as well.
Thank you all. My career is usually preceded by a word beginning with I, Vicky, but the I is usually for infamous rather than illustrious.
I was trying to be very polite. I'm sure there's a lot of infamy in there. I'm quite sure from some
As
of the
Kenneth
tales.
Williams said in Carry On Cleo, infamy, infamy, they all have it infamy.
Very good. And on that note, goodbye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks
Thank
to
you very much
everyone.
indeed.
Hope to see you all at our dinner in July. See ya.
Thank you all.
Thank you. See ya.